The moment the garage door creaked open and Patricia Delaney, president of the Maple Hollow Estates HOA, snuck her universal access fob into the keypad, she was greeted by a Glock, a badge, and the unimpressed face of Officer Ryan Schultz. My son stood there in his tactical vest, radio crackling on his shoulder, surrounded by surveillance equipment and two other detectives who looked equally bewildered by the rhinestone-bedazzled woman standing in the doorway with a yapping Pomeranian tucked under her arm. She said flatly, "I am conducting a routine community oversight inspection," while fumbling with the GoPro strapped to her chest like some kind of suburban commando. Ryan lowered his service weapon but kept his hand on his hip, his expression shifting from alert to annoyed in about 2 seconds. He said in that cop voice he'd perfected over 12 years on the force, "Ma'am, you just broke into a felony search in progress. That's obstruction." Patricia blinked rapidly, her false eyelashes fluttering like confused butterflies. She declared with a haughty tone, "But I am the Community Oversight Authority." Ryan's partner, Detective Martinez, actually snorted. Ryan responded without missing a beat, "Not anymore." And outside, the squad car lights flared to life, bathing my driveway in alternating red and blue. The look on Patricia's face was priceless, like someone had just told her that her precious HOA bylaws didn't override federal law. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. I'm Greg Schultz, a 62-year-old retired machinist who moved to Maple Hollow Estates 3 years ago for the peace and quiet, and honestly, for the oversized 2-car garage that came with the property. After 35 years of working with my hands, I wanted a place where I could tinker with my 1970 Corvette Stingray without bothering anyone. I kept to myself, grilled steaks every Thursday, and loved exactly 2 things in this world, that vintage Corvette and my son Ryan, who'd followed in his grandfather's footsteps and became a detective with the local PD. Unfortunately, Maple Hollow had a self-appointed queen bee named Patricia Delaney, a 58-year-old menace with a rhinestone phone holster, acrylic nails that could double as weapons, and an HOA binder thicker than the Bible. She'd been president for 7 years running, mostly because nobody else wanted the job badly enough to challenge her reign of terror. Patricia believed that garage doors left open for more than 3.7 minutes were security violations punishable by community shame and $75 fines. She measured grass height with an actual ruler and once tried to fine my neighbor for having the wrong shade of beige on his mailbox post. The trouble started small, as it always does with people like Patricia. First came the warnings about my garage being, quote, too visible from the road, unquote, even though it faced my own driveway. Then came citations about my driveway appearing oil-stained when it was literally just rainwater creating a slightly darker patch on the concrete. Patricia began doing what she called community wellness walkbys, which was really just her snooping around with her phone, snapping photos of anything she deemed non-compliant. She'd strut past my house at 7 a.m. sharp every morning, that poor Pomeranian struggling to keep up with her power walk pace, while she documented every perceived infraction in her little notebook. The grass was 2.75 inches instead of 2.5. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 17 minutes after pickup instead of the mandated 15-minute maximum. My American flag was flying at night without proper illumination, even though I had a solar light pointed directly at it. But then things escalated. Patricia installed a camera on a community light pole that just happened to be aimed directly at my garage, claiming it was for community safety and crime prevention. When I complained at the monthly HOA meeting, she said with a sickeningly sweet tone that only residents with something to hide would object to additional security measures. The other board members, mostly retirees who were terrified of her, just nodded along like bobbleheads. The real kicker came 3 weeks ago when Patricia proudly informed the HOA board that she had acquired what she called a universal key fob, a master code that she claimed gave her emergency access to any community-owned garage unit for safety inspections. She waved this little device around like it was Excalibur itself, declaring that she could now ensure full compliance with HOA standards by conducting surprise inspections. The problem with Patricia's grand plan was that my garage wasn't community-owned. I owned it outright, just like every other homeowner in Maple Hollow owned their garages. But Patricia, in her infinite wisdom, had decided that since the HOA governed the community, and the garages were in the community, she had oversight authority. It was the kind of twisted logic that would make a philosophy professor weep. Patricia made her move on a Thursday afternoon, the same day Ryan happened to be using my garage as a staging area for a warrant-backed surveillance operation. See, Ryan's unit had been investigating a suspected narcotics distributor who lived directly across the street from me. They had probable cause, a judge-signed warrant, and full clearance to use my garage as an observation post. Everything was legal, everything was by the book, and I was happy to help local law enforcement, especially when that law enforcement was my own son. Ryan and his team had been set up since 5 a.m., monitoring the house across the street through high-tech cameras and recording equipment. They were waiting for a delivery that their intel suggested would happen that afternoon. It was a big case, the kind that could dismantle an entire distribution network if they played their cards right. Then, at 2:17 p.m., Patricia let herself in through the side door using her magic master fob that she'd somehow programmed with my garage code. With her purse dog yapping like a furry car alarm and that GoPro strapped to her chest recording everything for what she probably thought would be HOA gold, she declared in her most authoritative voice, "This is a routine HOA inspection. You cannot be in here without resident approval, and I have not approved any workers or guests for this unit." Ryan turned around slowly, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon before recognizing the intruder as our neighborhood's biggest pain in the neck. He said calmly but firmly, "I am the resident's son, and also a cop, with a warrant. Now please exit the premises before you compromise an active investigation." Patricia's eyes narrowed to little slits as she processed this information. Then she doubled down, which in retrospect, was exactly what I'd expect from someone who once tried to measure the depth of my doormat. She announced, "I don't care if you're the Pope's nephew. This is HOA property during inspection hours, and I have absolute authority here. You need to show me permits for all this equipment, and I need to verify that this surveillance isn't violating any community privacy standards." Detective Martinez, who'd been monitoring the cameras, actually turned away from his screen to stare at her in disbelief. The third detective, a younger guy named Thompson, started recording on his phone, probably recognizing this was about to become the stuff of police department legend. After a tense standoff that lasted about 3 minutes but felt like 3 hours, Patricia was escorted outside by 2 uniformed officers who'd been called for backup, not for the drug bust, but to deal with her interference. As they led her away, she kept shouting about her rights as HOA president and threatening to fine everyone present for unauthorized use of community resources. Meanwhile, I calmly walked over to Ryan and handed him a thumb drive I'd been saving for just such an occasion. The thumb drive contained months of HOA harassment footage from my own security cameras, including Patricia entering my property without permission on multiple occasions, her taking photos through my garage windows, and my personal favorite, a video of her attempting to measure the oil stain that wasn't actually there with a tape measure at 6 in the morning. But the crown jewel was a copy of Patricia's own HOA memo where she bragged about her covert oversight abilities and how she could access any unit for compliance verification. Ryan filed an incident report that afternoon, and by the next morning, the police department had opened a formal investigation into Patricia's activities. The city's legal department received formal complaints not just from me, but from 17 other residents who suddenly felt brave enough to come forward. Turns out, Patricia had been conducting her special inspections all over the neighborhood. Several residents came forward with similar stories of unauthorized inspections where Patricia had entered their garages or storage sheds using her universal fob. Tom from Oak Street reported that his limited edition baseball card collection had mysteriously vanished after Patricia mentioned it violated the HOA's policy on visible collectibles. Sandra from 2 blocks over said her Amazon packages kept disappearing, always the day after Patricia commented on excessive delivery truck traffic. And perhaps most damning, Robert from the cul-de-sac revealed that his $800 BBQ smoker had mysteriously vanished the day after Patricia said it violated aesthetic uniformity guidelines. The evidence was mounting faster than Patricia's fines, and the HOA board could no longer ignore what was happening. They called an emergency meeting for the following Tuesday, sending out notices to every resident in Maple Hollow. The community center was packed, standing room only, with neighbors I'd never even seen before showing up to witness what everyone hoped would be Patricia's downfall. Patricia tried to play the victim from the moment she walked in, wearing what I can only describe as her court outfit, a severe black pantsuit with her HOA president pin prominently displayed like a badge of honor. She stood at the podium and said with a trembling voice that didn't fool anyone, "I have been nothing but a dedicated servant to this community, and now I'm being persecuted for just doing my duty. Everything I've done has been in the interest of maintaining our property values and community standards." That's when Ryan showed up, still in his detective attire but off duty, carrying a laptop and a portable projector. He asked the board president, a nervous man named Harold who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, if he could present some evidence. Harold, probably seeing a way out of the Patricia problem, immediately agreed. Ryan connected his laptop and played the garage footage on the community center's pull-down screen. The entire room watched in high definition as Patricia entered my garage without permission, her face clearly visible as she looked directly at my security camera, apparently not realizing it was there. The footage showed her trying to correct the surveillance team's clipboard, actually picking it up and attempting to read confidential case notes. But the best part, the absolute chef's kiss moment, was when she asked Detective Martinez if she could use their footage to find the suspect across the street for illegal curbside parking. The room went dead silent except for one board member whispering just loud enough for everyone to hear, "We're so getting sued." Another board member, an elderly woman named Dorothy who'd been on the board for 15 years, actually stood up and said, "I motion for immediate removal of Patricia Delaney as HOA president and board member due to gross misconduct and illegal activity." The motion was seconded by 4 people simultaneously. The vote was called, and it was unanimous. Even the 2 board members who usually sided with Patricia raised their hands. Patricia stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, as Harold officially announced her removal. As she was escorted off HOA property by 2 off-duty cops who happened to be there in flip-flops and Hawaiian shirts, having come straight from their backyard barbecues to watch the drama unfold, she screamed that this was a conspiracy and that she'd be back with lawyers. Patricia was fined $12,000 in civil damages for trespassing, invasion of privacy, and theft, the last charge stemming from several mysterious disappearances that suddenly made sense. She was also banned from holding any HOA office in the county, a judge's decision that made the local newspaper. She now runs a private Facebook group called Exiled by the HOA Deep State where she sells healing crystals and passive-aggressively quotes bylaws to her 12 followers, most of whom appear to be fake accounts she created herself.